and professor and head of our brain tumor program. And then Sophie Church is our fearless leader who runs, in many ways, the K12, along with Aaron, who I think is also online. So welcome. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this works. All right, is that in presentation mode? Does that look good? Someone, yeah, okay, all right. So this, I think the genesis of this is, I think Albert, while he was at Harvard, heard Dr. Jeff Lichtman give a talk about how to give a good scientific talk. And then Albert and I kind of took that and we updated it a little bit and made it our own with Dr. Lichtman's approval to use some of his slides. And we gave this to our own residents. And then we thought this would be good for this audience as well. And we've kind of updated it a little bit further. And
he actually was here when he gave these series of lectures at WashU.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
And then he moved to Harvard, but
okay.
Yeah, he's been very helpful.
Okay. And then I took clips from the internet, mainly from this kind of keynote speaker, Vin Jiang. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. And I have one about Denzel Washington at the end. So that's where we got the content.
If you are technically brilliant, so you're 10 out of 10 technically brilliant. However, if your ability to communicate is a 3 out of 10, do you think people perceive you to be a 10 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10? We are only as good as we can communicate. As you improve your ability to communicate, you improve the impact that you have within your teams, you improve the impact that you can have in your personal life. I've taught this to thousands of students, and I always see the same thing. Technically brilliant individuals not being recognized for how amazing they truly are. And it's simply because they keep telling others that, oh, I'll let my word speak for itself. Why not do both? Why not do both? We live in a society of this or that. It's not or, it's and. It's both. When you become undeniably great technically and you become undeniable with your communication skills, do you know what happens? Reality becomes negotiable. You can negotiate any reality you desire.
You guys hear that okay, hopefully? Not so well? Do I need to turn it up next time? Did you get the point of that? Hopefully, did anybody get the point? I mean, the point is, I think in particular with science, I think you could get fooled into saying, well, as long as my science is really good, or my research or my, whatever it is from an academic perspective, you're going to be presenting, that will carry the day. And it turns out, I don't think that's the case at all. And you need to learn, I would argue, and I think he says well, that if you can do both, if you have great science or great academics, or you have a great story to tell, and you tell it in a compelling way, you are going to elevate yourself and elevate your message to a much higher level. And I actually think this translates into grants and paper writing as well. If you can learn to tell a story in a verbal form, I think it also will help you do this in a written form, which we all know is the lifeblood of our academics. So I think we're just going to go through a few things, what I think is important as a speaker. One is starting out is you need to understand your audience. And there's several things. One is we're going to try to transmit as much as we possibly can of our content to them, but you need to think really intentionally on how to do this. And also understand who you're talking to. If you're talking to a bunch of scientists who are in the brain tumor space, then Albert can talk to them at that level. If he's talking to neurosurgeons who are academic, but not necessarily brain tumor people, you need to change your message. If he's talking to the lay public or talking to potential philanthropists and things, you need to change that as well. So understand your audience. The goal is to really transmit as much as you can, including the key points. Understand that they are intelligent, but also aim low. Remember that people you're talking to, even in the scientific world, may not know, certainly won't know your topic nearly as well as you are. So slowing it down and to some degree dumbing it down to make sure the messages come across, I think are important. If your audience is confused or bored or on their phone or not listening, it's your fault. It is your job as the presenter to get their interest and keep and maintain that interest throughout your talk. Avoid jargon, which is really easy to do, and I see it all the time. People use abbreviations and other jargon that can be hard to follow. Time yourself. I mean, everybody has a talk. I'm giving a talk at Oklahoma here on Thursday or Friday, one of the two. And I wanted to find out what's my time limit. And I want to make sure I hit that. And actually, I'd like to finish a little early to make sure that questions can be answered. And I want to make sure I have the time to go through my slides and tell my story without rushing. If you miss that and you realize, oh, I'm not going to hit my time, it's better to skip a few slides than to start really speeding up to get through your slides because it's going to be difficult for to the listener to hear that. And then finish on time or earlier. I mean, be respectful of everybody's time, including the next speaker, for example. I think you need to command the stage. And so, Sophie, you were kind of saying you couldn't hear it that well. Was it muffled or it was not loud enough or what?
For me, it was choppy. I don't know if anybody else had the same experience. I see Albert now.
It was okay?
I could hear it, but the video itself was choppy.
Choppy, all right. I'm going to send the videos, and I have some other longer videos that Albert and I chose. We'll share with you through the chat and through email. So if it doesn't come through for some of you, we can circle back. So the second step is after your audience is command the stage.
Hi, everyone. Look, so excited to be here to talk about the core vocal foundations of great communication. It's vital that you learn to apply the things you learn. Otherwise, you will not be able to amplify the best parts of who you are. Hi, great to see you all. I'm so excited to take you through some of the core vocal foundations. As we deep dive and we apply these, it will help you amplify the best parts of who you are. Which was better? We don't need to debate it. And they've done extensive research that people who use their body language are perceived as being better leaders. And we're all leaders in some place in our life.
All right, so I hope you get the point there. I think we need to think about, and this is not natural for us. I don't think this is not a natural thing as a scientist or as a surgeon or someone who is not a natural born, speaker to use your language. I can tell you it's not natural for me at all. And I've learned to use it better and better over time, but it really helps your message. I think you need to think about your talk itself. And it's good to kind of know what the key points you want to come across and especially per every slide, what are you going to start with and what are you going to end with? Think about that. And then as you kind of think about what you're going to say with each slide. So memorize the first and last thing you say. Begin with a general and fundamental statement that everyone will understand and agree with. End with a conclusion or a significance statement. And so it kind of looks like this. You're going to start with, I hope to convince you today that subarachnoid hemorrhage is really important. Right now we're not doing well. We have made no progress in terms of how patients are doing, in particular as it relates to cognitive outcome. And then I'm going to say something more about that. And at the end, I'm going to say, I hope through this, you can tell that poor cognitive outcome after subarachnoid hemorrhage remains a big problem, and we have not made progress. But I hope with what I just showed you, this is the beginning of a new novel therapeutic approach or whatever. So the point is a beginning and an end that you've thought about. Transitions are key. You want to prepare the listener for what is coming next, both in terms of what you will say and what you will show. So, you know what's coming up next. It might even be in presenter mode, so you even have the next slide coming up. You want to set it up so when you hit the next slide, people are prepared for that. Be repetitious. The last one that Albert will show you, which is Denzel Washington giving a graduation speech. He does this, repeatedly, but the key message gets repeated. And when you use when you use repetition, it kind of really reinforces whatever your message is, or use a similar type of style. We do this when you write a grant too. I'm not going to come up with one off the top of my head, but if you use the same style and the same phrasing or a similar phrasing kind of metric, and then you use that paragraph to paragraph, it kind of gives people a pathway through your grant or through your talk in a good way. So I think being repetitious for the key points is important. Front load your slides. Never press the advance button without setting up what's coming next. That's what I was saying earlier, where you know what's coming up and set that up with the audience. And then
when you're speaking,
I'll stop that for a second. And then you need to change it up during your talk. So change it up could be, I'm going to show a video, a short video, and before it was text. It might be, I'm going to show an image or a schematic, and then I'll show some text. You can also change it up in terms of your own delivery. You may start talking slowly, or you might speed up in different areas. And you want to have emphasis on certain elements that you really want them people to understand or listen to. So Albert, I actually think Albert, and he doesn't sometimes he thinks I'm not being truthful, but I really believe Albert is a much more natural speaker than me. There's a little bit more of a something like a theater quality to in a very good way in terms of how he speaks, and he does this because some of the stuff he does is pretty complex. It's not my area, brain tumors and immunotherapy and stem cells and things. It's not my sweet spot in terms of my own scientific understanding. But I can understand his talks, and part of the reason is he's like, okay, this is a key experiment. Really listen here on this. Listen closely on this one because this set up my whole, whatever, the whole grant or the whole project. But he clues you in. This is a time to really listen hard because this is a key point, or maybe it's a complex point, and you're going to have to listen hard to understand this complex point. So I think changing it up in vocal variety and the way you present and images and videos and things are all things. So this has to do with vocal variety, which I liked.
About something very important. Slow down. Doesn't that seem critical? And then if it's not as important, you can speed up. This simple rule alone allows us to create vocal variety with our rate of speech. Anytime we transition from slow to fast or fast to slow, that creates engagement in people's minds. Because you think you can predict it, but then you can't. And it re-engages your brain again.
So again, if you can't hear these, I'll share them offline. But this guy in particular, I find really helps me in terms of how you might better communicate. So that vocal variety is key. And then we're going to transition this to Albert. He's going to take the rest of these slides.
Yeah. So step 3 is to practice, and this is really important. I think in my training as a grad student, residency, and postdoc, I would always practice my talks, and in fact, probably my first 3 to 5 years as faculty, I would practice my talks. Now, what does that mean exactly? It's a little different depending on if it's an hour-long talk versus like a 5-minute talk, like for, show everything you did for 3 years in a 3-minute CNS talk, right? Those kinds of talks. You have to memorize a talk, I think, that's 10 minutes or less. You have to memorize it, even if you're senior, I would argue. But if you have an hour-long talk, you just have to remember sort of the trajectory of the talk, the transitions you want, etc. So next. All right, next. So practice physically out loud. And this is something I would do in front of a mirror multiple times. If you remember Annex Honnold and El Capitan, he practiced an incredible amount. Actually, that guy has, if I remember, he's very odd in that he has no fear. And I remember his pupils are huge for, I don't know, for a human being. You should listen to what you're saying and get feedback from an audience. I think that's important. Someone you trust. Next. Memorize the order of ideas, and that's particularly for a talk that you're doing for 30 minutes or longer. Again, I would argue you still have to memorize a talk that's 10 minutes or less, like a CNS or AANS talk, for instance. Next. And then know your slides. And the reason to say that, I mean, how many times do you see people do this? Like, okay, let's go to the next slide. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, for a second. We'll go back. Oh yeah. You see people do this all the time. They go to the next slide. Oh yeah, it's this. Let's go back 2 clicks, Dr. Zipfel. And so knowing your slides is important because you essentially want to deliver a seamless talk. And what I mean by that, it's like it's one talk. It's not 2 parallel talks. Like you're talking about something and then your slides are doing something else. You want them to be seamless. And there not to be any sort of sensory contrasts or distractions. Like, I'll give you some examples of this. So nobody's perfect, but also watch your uhs and ums. It's better just to not talk, honestly, instead of doing that. Something to consider, but I mean, nobody's perfect, me included, obviously. Next. So this is pretty interesting. Can you hear that? I can't hear that.
of these
Well, what he's basically saying here is that everybody knows what a bad or good talk sounds like, but you should actually reflect that on yourself. So he argues that you should record yourself 10 times on video, and then after doing that, you're going to become so much better. I think it's a really good idea. Next. And then this is going to be about that sensory contrast or dissonance that I was mentioning before. You want it to be a seamless talk. You don't want to be two parallel talks. So you need to effectively use images, videos, and text. Next. This is a great example. So I could be talking, but I mean, quite honestly, a lot of slides that people generate are exactly like this. Next. So how do we effectively use images, videos, and text? So examples: avoid information overload. Remember, you're going for 100% transmission. Use minimum essential data. That's a nerdy joke referring to minimal essential media. Point out the part of the image that you're talking about. And in fact, you could do this by animation, or you could do it by pointer. Next. Explain each part of the data, starting with the experiment, axes, and then the individual conditions. You want to just basically slow it down. Okay. Next. Incrementally add information. This is something Dr. Zipfel is really excellent at, really focusing your attention with this, by building on a figure piece by piece. So the listener can't look ahead. They're not listening to you if they're looking ahead. Next. So here's some examples of slides that are terrible, very, very bad. And you can imagine the person saying, I know this slide is busy, but now a gifted speaker can navigate through this, but you're really stacking the deck against you. So here's another example. Next. Very bad. Okay. It's better because the background's not super distracting like some terrain. And I have some comments on what kind of background I think might be better depending on the situation, but this is still bad. So next. This is just bad. It's getting a little better. And then next. This is good. So, if you have to, just make more slides. Okay. If you have like a 5-part figure, just make 5 slides is what I would say, or animate it so that you unveil it little piece by piece. Another example. Next. One thing I would say, the titles should be sentence capitalization, non-capitalization. It shouldn't be like all caps, and it shouldn't be like the T in title, S in should, B in be all capitalized. It should be sentence format, because that's the easiest to read. If you capitalize it, and you can do this yourself, if you capitalize it, you actually have to slow down your reading. I would also recommend a sans serif font, not something like Times New Roman or something like that, or Garamond, or they're very cool fonts, but it's just harder to read quickly. And so as an example, next. SOX2 is highly expressed in tumor cells. This is a UMAP of single cell data that I'm showing from 3 different glioblastoma tumors, for instance. Okay, next. So advanced techniques, and this is really more about connecting to people and tapping into a narrative. People respond to stories and emotions, so if you can personalize it, that's great. Next. Use metaphors. Now, this is getting more advanced, but metaphors can be very useful. Ask rhetorical questions to engage the audience, and then propose dichotomies, this or that, right? Next. This is a good idea. This has to do with the repetitiousness that Dr. Zipfel was talking about. It's interesting when you use the same word again and again, right? For instance, I don't know, ubiquitination. That's a terrible word to repeat again and again, but I'm going to do that. So ubiquitination is a fundamental post-translational modification. Ubiquitination is used to control DNA damage responses, but then, you get used to what I'm talking about. It's something that you can anchor yourself with. So people do this with a home image. You can imagine a schematic that you would always go to maybe a couple times during the talk. That could be your anchor. Next. Engage the audience, make eye contact, and cover the audience. Don't rove around. Just pick somebody, say a few things, say a few things that are part of one idea. Then you can move on to someone else, lock onto that person, say something else. embrace the liveness. You know, if someone's coughing, if somebody's coughing, recognize it if you have the wherewithal to do that. Now, this is sort of what you get when you're an amazing presenter, right? Like Denzel. And hopefully we can hear that. You increase the volume, maybe. Yeah, I can't hear that.
It might be because Dr. Zipfel is muted. I'm not sure.
Hmm.
Try
That may
again.
be.
Let me try again. Try again.
Yep.
It's probably, yeah.
Fail big.
Hold on.
Fail big. Today is the beginning of the rest of your life, and it can be very frightening. It's a new world out there. It's a mean world out there. And you only live once. So do what you feel passionate about. Take chances professionally. Don't be afraid to fail. There's an old IQ test was 9 dots. And you had to draw 5 lines with a pencil within these 9 dots without lifting the pencil. The only way to do it was to go outside the box. So don't be afraid to go outside the box. Don't be afraid to think outside the box. Don't be afraid to fail big.
Great. So that showcases a lot of things we're talking about. He understood his audience. He commanded the stage with body language, with eye contact, this kind of intentional repetitiveness that's very effective. Next. And he used advanced techniques, stories, emotion. I mean, actors are obviously a different level. They can emote using the same words that you and I would speak that would sound flat, for instance, but he is obviously great at that. Using metaphors, again, is a great tactic, and he engaged the audience. One thing I learned from doing this really odd thing that I did with Eric Luthart which was this theatrical thing called Brainworks. The actors, in addition to emphasizing words that you would normally want to emphasize, you know, let's say you're talking about subarachnoid hemorrhage, like Dr. Zipfel. So subarachnoid hemorrhage, you would, let's say, emphasize in a sentence, or vasospasm or something like that. They would tend to emphasize their verbs. It was quite interesting. And so that's something you can also play around with. Great.
Maybe you guys hear me okay? Maybe we can open it up and just see if anybody has any questions or comments. We have Dr. Amin Hanjani, Dr. Holly, I think Dr. Liao may have been with us, I think. So if any more senior people want to comment, or if anybody has questions, please, this would be a good time.
Yeah, hey, Greg, I was going to make a comment. First of all, Greg and Albert, great talk. I picked up a few things of my own, so thanks for sharing that. You know, one thing that's a pet peeve of mine when putting on conferences is, you know, it's not uncommon to fall a few minutes behind. You know, somebody takes a little longer than allocated, or, you know, a lot of questions. And the one thing that I try to stress people to avoid is that when you're getting up there and you know that you're behind, for whatever reason, people love to say, we're running late, so I'm going to rush through this. And so you never want to do that. As the speaker, you know the clock, and you understand that you have to do your share to kind of get back on time. So give the talk in a way that'll kind of get you back on time, but don't tell the audience that we're running late, because then they're going to think, oh, we're running late, things are going wrong. You know, just, you know, be professional, kind of do your part to kind of get back on time, and then kind of handle it that way. And you'll notice that frequently people do the opposite, and they announce how late everything is, and it just kind of ruins the mood a little bit, and people then think you're rushing when you're not.
Thanks, Langston. Any other comments or questions, anybody?
So Greg, I just wanted to reemphasize a couple of points that you and Albert, I think, made and actually demonstrated really well. That concept that I think Albert mentioned, but was present in pretty much every one of your slides, the concept of progressive disclosure. I don't think the value of that can be overestimated. And so if you noticed on their slides, like a point came up, then it was time for the next point, that came up, that came up. The mistake I still see a lot of people do is they put their, say there's your 4 or 5 bullet points on a slide, they put all points up at the get-go. And all of us are reading down to the 5th point while the speaker's talking about the first point. It is just natural for us as human beings to look at the end. So I think that progressive disclosure, you can animate that into each of your talks very easily, and I would do it consistently, because I think if you've got multiple things on your slide, be aware everyone's always going to be looking at the end. The other thing I'll just reemphasize is that I see in science talks all the time, especially laboratory-based science, is the cramming of incredible amounts of data in tiny font. Nobody can see it. And again, as Albert said, unless you're a really gifted speaker where you don't even need to see what's on the slide, it's just, I mean, it drives me crazy when people do that. And then the third point I'll make is just one advanced technique, which I have zero skill in, but every talk I give, I try to insert it at the end of the talk or at the beginning or somewhere, is humor. You got to be careful with humor, though. I always test it out before I do it, because sometimes you can get off on the wrong track with humor, but it is an advanced skill that I think can be really effective if you can inject it at some point in the talk and can get your audience kind of engaged and interested as you get going.
Thanks, Seppi. I see Dr. Hayden Gephardt's also on the line, and Melanie gives great talks. Any comments, Melanie, from you?
I think those are all great points. Everyone will remember if you run way over, and it will make everyone upset. So think that if for content slides, you really just want one content slide per minute, and a filler slide or a picture sometimes where it's just a picture. I do this a lot where I just put up a picture of something nice that portrays a point that I'm trying to verbally get across. I think that that can be more impactful than something that would be otherwise distracting. Please remove all, as was said, likes, etc. out of your vernacular and practice that. A simple pause, as was mentioned, could be more helpful. And a great figure in an article is a terrible slide. So simply choose the one that you think is the most visually interesting and compelling and explain it thoroughly.
Thanks, Melanie.
Thanks.
So
That's great.
one thing I do vividly remember, I think that the first time I ever heard Melanie give a talk, I think it was at a K12, and most stayed behind the lectern, and Melanie deliberately, and she was in front of the lectern or kind of in front of the whole audience, and kind of went to the left, went to the right. And if in the chat, if you check, I listed a series of mostly YouTube videos. I think they're all YouTube videos, and they're kind of telling you what they are. One of them is, I'm pretty sure it's the hand gestures one, the second one. The person who's doing that, who won like the Toastmasters World Championship, speaker. He's one of these kind of just people that are just amazing. Given 4 main points, but one of them was talking about the lectern. And he said, either get away from the lectern like Melanie did, because I remember it very vividly the first time, I heard her talk. Or if you're at the lectern, he talks about standing a little bit away from it, just like even 6 inches, and don't put your hand on the lectern, because once you put your hands on the lectern, it's unlikely you're going to express and do these kind of things that are really important to getting your communication out. So either get out from the lectern or stand a little bit away from it so you can reference it, but keep your hands off the lectern because it allows you to use your hand gestures much better.
Yeah, and people start leaning on it in weird ways. You'll start doing crazy things. So I just don't touch the podium or lectern. I think that's a great suggestion.
So again, in the chat, I don't know, maybe Sophie, you can email. I don't know if you have email but these videos are, in my opinion, worth watching. Most of them are just a few minutes long. And I did put a couple of expert presenter videos. One is a different Toastmaster, amazing talk. And then actually then someone actually analyzed that talk and gives you some pointers about how he was so effective. So that's down there. And then the last one, I tried to find a couple of scientific talks. Albert found this one by Susan McConnell, who's a scientist, I think at Stanford or somewhere out west, that it's very good talk and is talking about how to specifically give a good scientific presentation. So that's worth a listen. And then last, I just tried to find someone that you all would know and recognize online who's given a talk that I think is a really great communicator. I found one that John Sampson gave. Sounds like it was to a little more of a lay audience, you know, like a philanthropy type of event, but really good. And so that might be something you'd look into. So, okay, I think we're going to go on the PowerPoints. The first one is Anna Huguenard, who is one. She just graduated Wash U as a chief resident last year, and now she's an endovascular fellow. She's won a ton of awards. She's an amazing academician, clinician, and scientist, and she gives a great talk. She really does. I took her slides, and I'm gonna, show you a couple of things that I think might be something for her to consider to even improve upon what she already does quite well. So hopefully this. So I'm going to show you her. I'm not going to go through this in any huge detail, but I'm going to just show you her slides first. So these are just her slides. And I'm just going to kind of, give you a minute, a few seconds on each slide just to kind of take it in. So this is slide 1, 2, 3, 4. This has an animation. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And this is our last slide. And then the thank you slide. So that's her presentation. She obviously would make that fun and interesting and go through everything. But that's just themselves now. And then, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you. What I did is I picked some of her slides that I think might be able to be improved. And I'm going to show you her slide, and I'm going to show you how I might think, edit it a little bit to make it a little bit cleaner to me. So this is her title slide. And I just took it and I made that. So I don't know. I mean, some of this is style, but to me, there's a lot of, even the title is a lot of words. And so I try to simplify the title, and I try to take out a little bit of some of the extraneous stuff. And I also try to put the visual, because her whole talk is about this transauricular vagus nerve stimulator. And unless you see it, it's hard to understand what the heck that is. So why not put it at the very beginning? So you already have a picture in your mind what she's going to be talking about for the next talk. So that's one slide. This is her slide. This is early on talking about the vagus nerve innervation and the parasympathetic pathways. And so I took that and I made it I animated this like, okay, now we're going to be talking about a wholly new approach to immunomodulation, a non-invasive vagus nerve stimulation. And then we'll bring this up and she could walk through these pathways to you. But again, her slide looked like this. I made it look like that. To me, it's a little simpler, a little cleaner, and less clutter above, especially if you look above and below, there's something always, on every slide, there is this stuff above and below. And I think it distracts to me from the punchline. And here, if you clean it up, you lose that and you really pay attention to what the content is, I think. So her slide, she actually made it so it's not really exactly how she had it, but I just, again, tried to simplify it. This is what, if you invasively do vagus nerve stimulation, it looks like this. And then you animate it. But this is what we're going to. You don't have to do any surgery. You just put this on their ear 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night. And that's the treatment that they're talking about. This is her slide, which is kind of really defining the study that she did. I find this pretty busy. And so again, I clean this up. She did a phase 1 randomized controlled trial at one center for subarachnoid hemorrhage patients. And then she defined the impact of transauricular vagus nerve stimulation on inflammatory markers in the plasma and CSF. And here are her clinical endpoints that she's looking to see vagus nerve stimulation improves. This is her study design, and in her talk, she had this all up at once. And I would probably do something like this. This is study design. This is a prospective randomized clinical trial. Here are the patient inclusion and exclusion criteria. Here's a randomization, just to kind of walk through it step by step. And this is her conclusion slide. And what I would do is not do this. I would do this. This is summary point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's it. So those are just some suggestions from my perspective about how to maybe make that a little cleaner and a little bit easier to follow. So I think Albert has 2 others that he was going to do the same kind of thing, and then I think we'll have probably a good amount of time to answer any questions from this part of the webinar.
Okay, one sec.
If Anna's online, thanks Anna for sending the slides in.
Yeah, I don't know the folks who sent me these 2 presentations I'm going to show you real quick. I think they're really interesting in terms of content. These are not, again, criticisms about the content itself, but it's just about how they're being presented. So this is the first one. And I'm going to just put this into slide view mode. So what you'll notice here in this presentation by Chris Connor, again, this is actually quite fascinating talk about the rise of Uber and the decrease in motor vehicle collisions and DWI and DUI and things like that. But you'll notice that the slides are this old format, and this is the format we used to use when we printed out slides, and that carried over to the first generation of PowerPoint. But now things are different. But let me flip through some of these, okay, just to give you an idea of this. Okay. I would say overall, I like the fact that they're spare. But just to show you how I might change things. So, we had this set of slides with that aspect ratio. You just feel so much more relaxed, and you can let out a sigh when you see the normal aspect ratio here. I think that actually adds a lot of space and even emotionally. And I think the same thing is here. Now, the other thing I would comment about here is the titles are simple, and it is sans serif, but they're a little too distracting in my opinion. So for instance, I think this is already, for instance, better. Just that everything, like the human eye is attracted to contrast and size and things like that. So I think there's just too much focus on that title. So I think doing that helps a lot. If you can, high definition images also help. Sometimes if you see a pixelated image, your mind just sort of fixates on that, and then you're not listening to the person anymore. So let's see. I have some other examples of things I changed. So here is an interesting slide about the background of Uber and if drunk driving is decreased by the rise of Uber, et cetera. But it's there's no unveiling of components. It's a little distracting in terms of how it's presented, in my humble opinion. So how do I change that? So first thing I would do is, again, take out that blue. The title is not the center of the entire slide. And then the other thing I would do is, me personally, I would generally put the title in a different color. I like generally fonts, again, that are sans serif. I personally hate Calibri just because it's the default font and I feel like it's lazy, but that's just me. I like Avenir, Arial, Helvetica, things like this. This is Avenir, but I make the title a slightly different font, and I generally don't like bolding the title because then it just focuses your attention completely on the title. And then, you unveil things like we were saying before. The other thing I did, if you notice, is put an outline around the picture just to make it pop a little more. So I think that seems like a good sequence. Now, the next one is a very similar sort of approach. I think, again, this title just completely distracts from the rest of the slide. So I did that. And then, again, I changed the title so that you can see it's in a different color. And then I reveal things one by one. Okay. So that's one example. The light keeps on turning off in this room. I'm going to show you another example here. This is by Dr. Sis Dakhani at USC. Again, super interesting talk in Bill Mack's lab, studying white matter injury triggered by air pollution. Really fascinating. What I would say for this first one is I think the contrast is not sufficient. I personally, again, don't like Calibri. Sorry. That's just, again, a pet peeve of mine. But I think I would do something like, let's see, like something like this, and I would just increase the contrast on that. I'm sorry. I thought I could actually just do that in real time. But I think by increasing the contrast, the title will pop more. I would probably personally also decrease the number of words in the title because it's a bit wordy and people be reading it instead of listening to your fundamental statement that you should be starting with. Let's see. We'll go to some other slides. So this is the slide here in terms of the first content slide. I think there are a lot of interesting things here that you could, read, but again, it's distracting because it's large areas of text. And so I think what I would do is something like this. I would take one of those images and again, unveil each of these elements. And if you took a look at what I was doing, I actually made that one slide into two different slides. So the top part is this, and then the other part I would say, I know this is just fake data that I took off the internet, but I would do something like this. And I generally just like to, I think Melanie mentioned this, put up a picture and then what you would have put in text, you should just say it. I think people respond to that better. Now, this is a slide, again, that is showing a model system. I think there are a number of things you could do with this. You can unveil things. You could take one part of it against this left side and the bottom right, and you could put it together. And then you can display things again one by one. But personally, I would have probably done this as a timeline. I think for animal experiments where you're doing multiple things, you just put a timeline and you just, again, unveil things as they come out. This is a pretty dense slide with a lot of data. Again, super interesting content, but I think what I might do is, first of all, talk about this left side here, fractional anisotropy, just in one slide. And I probably would have a schematic describing what it is fractional anisotropy is, and I would unveil each of these comments. And then the middle and the right side, I would probably make into one figure, but I would only pick a certain area of the brain. So for instance, I would just pick corpus callosum as an example and really point out what the differences are. And then you can, in the histogram, show what the sort of differences you see in the rest of the brain, for instance. That's about it. Great.
Thanks, Albert.
Maybe if there are any other questions about some of the things we talked about, we're not trying to say that there's just one way to do things. I do think, depending on your, the ability of your verbal ability, you can, again, negotiate through a more complicated slide. And I'm not saying you always have to do like 3 or 4 or 5 things in a list in animation. I mean, some people argue the human eye can actually count 5 or 6 things without counting in like a millisecond. But if you start putting things like 6 or 7 or 8 things, your brain has to start counting. So some people do put like 3 or 4 items in a list just together.
Anybody brave enough to ask a question?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm Jordan from Michigan. We talked about the lectern, and this is something that I always really wondered. All the best presenters just get up and wander around the podium with the microphone or this, anything. But I've always been too scared to do that, especially when it's like a 5-minute humble talk at CNS or ANS. It just seems inappropriate to kind of get up and start walking around like you're, the big deal. But, nevertheless, I've always wanted to do that. What do you think about that? Is it always appropriate, inappropriate, or, only when you're like the plenary speaker?
No, please
go ahead, Albert. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think if you're at a session where, it's, you're one of,
Yeah, I think those are all great points. I would say, yeah, that's not the appropriate venue to get up and sort of do your own front of the stage, walk around the audience thing, particularly because the setup of the mic. Don't ever think that everyone says, oh, I have a strong voice, I can project. There's a lot of, usually, I mean, not older, but people who can't hear as well in the background. And so never not use a mic. Always make sure that you use the mic when available. So if usually that's the limiting factor, if they don't have one to tag on you. The second issue is how you advance the slide. So it's very much worth it. You can buy an adapter so that you can have your USB-C adapter that then takes many other adapters. So as you plug in your computer, and I always request to run it from my own computer, then I can just use something that has both a clicker and a laser pointer, and then I'm free. I'm not tied down to my computer to advance the slides anymore. So I actually have a travel case that I bring all those things with me. Not every setup is amenable to it, but if it's possible, and for a longer talk than your 5-minute talk, pretty soon all your talks will be plenary grand rounds. But until then, I think it's good to practice.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Dr. Zipfel, Greg and Melanie were saying about the appropriateness of walking around at like a AANS CNS talk that's like 3 or 5 minutes. I think you have to stay behind the podium for that. But in terms of just walking around, I do think you don't want to make your main points while you're moving. I do think a lot of people, even though they say walking the stage, commanding the stage is a good thing, that when you want to make your point, you actually want to plant your feet and then make your point looking at one individual, for instance. I have heard that. The other thing I would say is, sure, we can practice all these things, but I don't think a lot of these things are natural to me. So you do have to use gestures that you think are natural for yourself. I mean, everyone can get better practicing, but you have to be yourself as well.
I think that's another good point, is that really you have to find a style that works for you. If you need a coach and to practice it daily to feel comfortable, it's probably not going to feel comfortable and natural when you're doing it. And the point is, I think, for your audience to feel your engagement with your work and your enthusiasm, and that is difficult to fake.
Thank you.
I think there was another question. I think maybe, no?
I had one.
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
Hey, I'm a PGY5. I'm also from University of Michigan. One thing I always struggle with my presentations for like scientific data is how much background to give, how much time to spend on like background and an introduction. And I find myself sometimes, sometimes I'll give like too many slides, kind of explaining to people exactly the premise of the project. And then sometimes I do too few in an interest of trying to get, more to the primary data. I was wondering if you guys had any recommendations on how to tailor your presentation to your audience. Is it more like if I'm presenting to people in my specific field, I do less? Like, how do you kind of approach that so you get the maximum understanding from your audience and engagement?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I mean, I think you got to gauge the audience, you know, and so if you're talking to, you know, if you're going to give a grand rounds at a department of neurosurgery, you know, or you're, you know, it's your time as a resident of a presentation department, you know, it's mainly neurosurgeons or kind of heading towards being neurosurgeons. You know, I give a talk about whatever your area is. For me, you know, dural AV fistulas. I mean, I literally will take one slide to make sure, especially with fistulas, because not everybody understands fistulas that well, but I'll take a slide just to make sure we're on the same page and kind of right size. I really like to have visuals. And so I've invested in art to make people oriented. Say something I'm trying to do is provocative about, you know, why this is important, and then get into the meat of it. But if you're talking to a different audience who, you know, maybe they don't know a lot about neuroscience of the brain or something, then you're going to need to take a little bit more time. The other thing that I've done, and Albert and Sophie, who's on, they've seen me, you know, I mean, I have had the opportunity to give talks, you know, where it's a combination of scientists and lay people in a couple of different venues. That's tough. And a couple of venues I'm talking about is where you really are expected to give some of your work, you know, but you also know that your mentor, or, you know, I don't know, your family's in the audience, or other, or philanthropists or other people who are tied to your department who really have no background at all. That's a tough one. What I've done is I kind of signal. I'm like, I have some more broader topic, you know, broader comments or things that I want to convey to the entire audience. But then when you get to the meat of it, something that's really in the weeds, I tell them, I'm like, with me. I promise I'm going to come out, you know, and then have some general points. But by doing that, the people who are interested are going to try. They're going to zoom in and really be with you. For some, that might be a time that they kind of, you know, they're like, I'm not going to be able to follow this, but at least what you're warning them is, I know I'm going in the weeds right now, but I'm going to come out of it, and I'm not going to be on this topic too long, you know. But if you kind of prepare people, and Albert's really good at this, you know, I find people who are doing genetics and epigenetics or computational work, you know, neural networks. For me and my background, I have a hard time following that stuff. But if you tell me, okay, you're gonna see some, you know, waterfall plot or whatever, you know, and you kind of explain it, but there's a real important point here, you know, then okay, I'm gonna listen, I'm gonna try to get that point, and then Albert's gonna tell me why this is so important and as it relates to glioblastoma pathophysiology or something like that. If you kind of warn people and tag them, it gets prepared when you're going to get into the meat of something that you know is going to be a little complicated. So that'd be a couple thoughts I have about it.
Yeah, I think those are great points. It's a hard question. I struggle with it too, quite honestly. I mean, on the one hand, you don't need to put up the slide about glioblastoma having a median overall survival of 17 months in front of neurosurgeons or in front of a bunch of scientists who study glioblastoma. So I do see people who just don't cut to the chase. There is that. At the same time, some people get into the weeds too much, just as Dr. Zipfel was saying, you know, and I think it's a great idea to signal to them sort of two ways I deal with that. One is metaphors, right? I think that's a great way to deal with it. A second good way to deal with it is to tell them what the highest level sort of logical experiment is in that field. So the best kind of experiment in this field is to do something called the rescue. So you get rid of the gene and then you have to put the gene back, and then, so that's what I'm going to show you. So then those are the sort of tricks I also use. You tell them what the gold standard is in a field, and then that kind of helps you connect with them, because that kind of makes you look like an outsider also.
I just want to raise one other point that hasn't been made yet, is please don't forget to acknowledge everyone who has contributed to the project. If you have a student or someone who's working with you, all of my data slides have a picture and name of the person who actually generated the data. It's a little different. I'm not generating my own data anymore, but just don't forget all the students and undergrads and medical students who've really helped you to put everything together. I think that's important to acknowledge. It's not all you.
Got about 2 minutes left. Any last questions? Yeah, go ahead, Shruta.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on the scientific citation within a presentation. Most scientific talks have a citation, or sometimes you'll see a screenshot of the publication. And many scientific organizations like HHMI are now recommending just having the author and the PMID to avoid kind of distracting or seductive details. So curious to know your thoughts and if you have any guidance on that.
I keep it pretty minimal, just name, journal title, abbreviated, and year. And that's it. And only to speak to one specific data point, where that way people can find the citation.
Yeah, I do the same exact thing, and I keep the font a little smaller than the rest of the slide.
I think the the list of references at the end of the talk is a complete waste of time, but some people still do that. The other thing I think we all should challenge ourselves on this, and I'm guilty of this as well, is if you really listen to people who are great speakers, this idea of an outline at the beginning, or or here are the points I'm going to make, and it's really I still do some of that. Frankly, myself away from that, and for asking, I can't.
Greg, your internet might be a little dotty.
Oh, you can't hear me?
Yeah, so sorry, it's a little choppy.
It's
Okay,
critical,
I'll stop talking. I'll stop
critical
talking.
to providing a good presentation.
Something related to that, I think, if I understood what he was saying, was, there's this thing when you, let's say you have an agenda. An agenda is good for one thing. If you have more than one story, then people don't think you're done when you're done with the first story. So the agenda helps with that for expectation management at the end of the parts, because you don't want to have like 3 parts and then you're at the end of your first part and other people say this and you're like, to conclude, yada yada yada, and then everyone's like, okay, we're out of here, bye, and then you do story number 2. That makes people very angry. So agenda is good for that. But if you're going to have no agenda and you have 2 or 3 stories, then you should conclude with, for the first part, conclusion for the first part, yada, etc. That's something to keep in mind.
Any last comments? Or go ahead.
Just a quick question. This is Cole from Mass General. Just wondering if you guys can comment on, because you usually get questions at the end of the talk, and I was wondering how you guys think about that and anticipate some of the questions and how you respond to that.
Yeah, in the interest of everyone staying on time, don't feel bad to sign off if you have a commitment now, it being past 6 Pacific time. But what I would say is there's a couple of points about that. Number one is that usually you'll find the more you give a similar talk, the more the questions kind of tend to be of a similar pattern, which can also tell you which points you've missed in your talk. And also to always rephrase the question to make sure that you understood it properly before proceeding with the answer. It's okay to say that you don't know, or to say that you can provide additional references. And if it's going over time, then take the burden off the moderator and just say that you'd be happy to answer any questions. And I just have a QR code at the end of my talk so that people can easily get a hold of me.
Great. Well, maybe I'll conclude. Maybe I'll say one thing, and then Albert may want to say something as well. But what I would say is, I really take this to heart. I think that giving a really good presentation is going to help your career, help your science, help you tell your story, help you get grants, help you advance. It really is going to help. I mean, the number of times some of us who've been on scientific program committees. It is about the content. You want somebody who's got a cool story, but it's absolutely, you're going to get more invitations if you're talking. 100%. They're going to say, okay, we need someone to give a talk about glioblastoma. They're going to think about the science, but they're 100% can also say, oh yeah, Albert can give a great talk. Melanie can give a great talk, and you're going to get more invitations. So I would really push everyone to really think about this hard. And I didn't do it enough early on, probably when I was first starting, but I take it seriously now. And I think you all can benefit from it's not going to be just one webinar. You're going to have to get into this a little bit and challenge yourself and have people, give you feedback or record your talk and look at it, and people get speaking coaches and things like that. But all those things I think are fair game. It's really going to be an investment in your future. So that'd be my closing comment. And then I'll leave it to Albert for a last comment.
Yeah, I think it's really about telling stories, whatever you have on your plate, whether it's a scientific paper, a clinical outcomes paper, maybe it's a talk for medical students. I think it's about telling stories. And remember, you just have to tell one story. You don't want 3 or 5 stories going on at the same time. And that's why it's so important to plan out your slides and be really seamless about it. I mean, it's really like, doing a Jedi mind trick on people. Honestly, you are leading them along to think a certain way so that you get your story across. And it's really important. Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Very much.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.